All right, we've hit noon, so we'll go ahead and get started. Hello and welcome. Thank you all for joining us to what is our final iteration of our Lunchtime Looks program for the academic year. We will, of course, be back next fall, but we're so excited for today's speaker to round out the offerings for this academic year because, of course, we have one of the two artists featured in our exhibition, Screams and Whispers. So it's my pleasure to introduce today Patricia Bellan-Gillen. Pat lives and works in Western Pennsylvania and recently retired from Carnegie Mellon University after 29 years as a professor there, but also has had her work shown in over 50 solo exhibitions and many group shows. And so we are honored to have her here in this two-person exhibition with Karen Broker that has been a delight to share with the university audiences and has been so well received. And everyone here will now get a little inside glimpse into how some of this work came to be. So without further ado, I'll introduce you to Patricia Bellan-Gillen.
Thank you so much for coming out. Before I launch into anything, I brought some swag for you. There's some catalogs from an exhibition that I did about 10 years ago, and it's where this body of work started. So I'll refer to one of the photos of the works in there, but those, please take one as a gift from me in the museum. So. Before I start to even talk about my work, one of the things, I don't want to sound patronizing or whatever, but one of the things I wanted to start with was just to talk about how grateful I am, and I know Karen is, to have this chance to show our work together. And I think this is one of the most beautiful installations of my work that I've ever felt. And I think I would say the same with Karen's. There's such care in putting it together. There's such a rhythm that the figures make, and with my drawings that I think it's exceptional. And for me, it gives you a chance to notice things like how incredible the shadows are, how they make such an important part of the installation. But thank you for that. Karen and I, a little bit of background, Karen and I met almost 50 years ago in the old Colbert Research Building, the old printmaking building at Carnegie Mellon University. And we clicked right away, and we began to talk about our thoughts about art that didn't always match, but we totally respected them. And also both of us became educators, and really both of us loved the whole act of teaching and being part of an education system. So we're incredibly grateful, both of us, that we've had this chance to find this dream of showing together after 50 years. It took a while for it to come together, but thank you. And to kind of address, I think the text over there addresses some of the connections between the two of us. I would just say that to continue from that and to add on to that, Karen and I share several things. One, how the work is driven, how, the concepts behind our work. We're not always trying to make an absolute political statement, but to bring people in and to think about the work. And we're both very conscious of social issues, political issues that drive the work, inspire the work, push the work. Her work tends to be much more focused on feminist issues, and my work kind of goes across the board. And whether I realize it or not, it's always a reaction to what's going on politically or socially. And sometimes I don't realize exactly what it was till months after the work is created. I think I do, but I don't. To both of us, process is really important. For me, I don't speak for Karen. No one really speaks for no one speaks for Karen. But I do know for me, and I think for her, just the whole act of making is incredibly important and is embedded into our daily lives as much as it can be. So the process is probably physiological for both of us. There's a need to make it physically and a need to make it emotionally and mentally. Aesthetically, especially with this group that's here, I think something that really dominates the show is this accumulation of details and this layering of details. If you look at her work from a distance, there's a beautiful abstract quality to the figures and the objects that she makes, but when you begin to look closer, there's this beautiful layering of objects. And I think with my work, there's a layering of imagery. For this body of work, she constantly collects objects. I constantly collect images, and she has shelves full of objects and images, and I have file folders on my computer that I can't always find that are full of images, ones that I draw and ones that I collect as I peruse the internet or go through children's books or look at the history of illustration or the history of art. So there's this layering and a collection of images. So the work starts so much time before we even begin to put the work together. And I think one of the important things is each object or image has an inherent or intrinsic value to it. What does it mean, or what do we associate it with? And to me, a good example is to look at the skirts of the figures of Karen's that are in the center of the room. An obvious one is a baby shoe. If you see an old white baby shoe, that has a certain thought, a certain association for everyone. Now, because it's an old white shoe, it has a different association. I don't think you guys wore those little white Oxford shoes. So it has a time signature as well as an emotional or ideological connection to it. But when you keep looking, when you get closer, when you see the shoes, I'm going to say next to a bullet or next to, I think on the one skirt back there, there's pieces of like keyholes from doors. The idea changes, and there's a conversation between the two objects. I think Mel Chin, the artist, called it loading the work. And the same process goes for me as I collect these images, and I put, if I use the lamb, like it's in that piece right behind you there. The lamb for most of us is a pretty strong Christian symbol, but when that lamb's accompanied by a zebra, or that lamb is accompanied by, I don't see anything Pinocchio, a different conversation starts that changes, well, what happens to this lamb if it's in a boat with Pinocchio? So I see that. I think that's a really important connection between the work for us, just this value of putting out and putting together associative images. So, and talking about my work, I'll move into that. One of the things I always quote, and when I'm asked to talk about my work, I guess I'm haunted by a statement that Joseph Campbell said. And one of his statements, he says, and I'm paraphrasing him badly here, but he says, the artist who tells you about what their work means is insulting you. And they're stealing from you. They're stealing the chance for you to see what that work means to you, what your associations are, what your emotions might be to a simple color. So I always kind of think of that. And I just had a real opportunity to hear Percival Everett speak, and he wrote the book James that's been the #1 bestseller right now. And during his an incredible book, if you haven't read it, he says, when people ask me, what's this book about exactly? He says, I don't know. It doesn't mean anything until someone reads it. And so for me, I think if somebody says, what's your work about, when I begin to step back, I think the most obvious or most honest answer from time to time would be, I'm really not sure. I don't know for sure. But I'm going to insult you just a little bit, and I'm going to tell you what I think the work is about, or what's behind it all. Sorry if I cling to notes. I haven't done this for a while. So I passed out the catalogs as a gift, but there's a piece on page 19 in the catalog, and that's where this work began. This body of work began about 10 or 11 years ago, when I was listening to I listened to books on tape and I was reading. And I have to explain, I'm extremely visual. If you cough, I either see a shape or color that goes through my head. If you sneeze, I see a different shape or color. So words and sound are often a trigger. A specific word might be the rhythm of it, or it might be a phrase that triggers something in my head. So this body of work began I heard the word or read the word cartouche. And I thought cartouche, I thought it sounded funny, but then it had this, when I looked it up to get specifics, and it was spelled in French, of course, it sounded smart and kind of beautiful. And so the work began when I looked up the meaning of cartouche. It has 3 real specific meanings. It's an architectural frame, and you often see old maps, a graphic frame, these elaborate maps that sometimes have nothing to do with what the map is inside of it. But usually it was an elaborate architectural frame that denoted either an important person, an important historical event, or an important date. A second definition for cartouche, and that's with an O-U-C-H-E, not O-O-S-H, is the lozenge shape that you see in Egyptian hieroglyphics. And when it brings like several hieroglyphics together in like that pill shape, it either denotes a specific name or it's a phrase. So I like that. And the third definition is it's a cache to hold weapons or a cache to hold gunpowder. So I thought the three definitions together, I thought I just loved that. At the same time, I was listening to the book The Guns of August by Barbara Tuchman about how World War I started. And she started talking about words, and one word was, and somebody could say it better in French, the red pantaloons, the red pants, les pantalones rouges. So if there's any French speaking, please help me out there. And I began to think about how very specific words, and words you didn't even think about, could be used as weapons. And in this case, French soldiers died because they had to wear these beautiful red pantaloons, these beautiful red pants, because someone high up thought they should wear them because they would look good on the battlefield. And what they ended up being was a red target. So people died because of that. And 2 other words, and the 3 pieces that you see in the catalog, and they seem kind of obscure things to pick on, but in my ears, they had this beautiful poetry to them. One of the words, I think I was listening to Galileo's daughter, and it was talking about how he was put under house arrest for saying that we had a heliocentric universe. And I thought that such a beautiful term, it had a beautiful poetry and a beautiful cadence to it. But people were killed because of saying that the sun was at the center of the universe. The Catholic Church put them to death for being heretics. And the third word, and this one sounds really, this phrase, the open polar sea, which I thought, I have a fetish about listening to books about who survives on the ice, because I know I wouldn't. But the open polar sea was a hoax that people believed in. And a German map maker said that when you are looking for the Northwest Passage, you'll get to a place where the ice ends and there's this beautiful, it's tropical in the center of the Arctic Ocean up there, the ice mass. And so hundreds and hundreds of people died because they believed they were going to get to the Arctic and find this open sea. So those were the weaponized words, something that might sound beautiful that could kill you or would kill you. So the work started evolving, but the oldest pieces in the show, and this piece with Humpty Dumpty here is one of the few, I think it's the only one in the show that actually has the word. And I began to think, what's the most dangerous, what's the most loaded word in the English language? And I thought, mine, and just this idea of grabbing and wanting mine. So the work began with just the architectural elements that you could see there, and then they started filling in with characters from nursery rhymes or characters that I made up. I'm still putting in Pootie because there's always fat angels in cartouches, so they became still an important part. But this one for Humpty Dumpty, and I'm using the original John Tenniel illustration for Humpty Dumpty there because it's how most of us would associate what Humpty Dumpty looks like, and it's just a stunning drawing that I don't think anybody could come up with. People try but haven't come up with a better Humpty Dumpty. And I like his gesture, that he's kind of has this holding court gesture when he meets Alice and in the book Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. And she comes upon him sitting on the wall, and they immediately get into an argument about what words mean. And he finally declares, and again, I'm paraphrasing Humpty Dumpty. He says, words mean exactly what I say they mean, nothing more, nothing less. And I thought that's such a declaration of power. And so the whole work, the idea of something is mine because I say it's mine, this word means what I want it to mean, is the basis that kicked that piece off. And I'll go a little bit quicker here, one of the early works is the one way in the back, the orange one with the real funny black shake that comes off of it. And that piece is called Dominion. And I think also that dominion is a very dangerous word. And again, I can't quote it exactly, but I think in the Bible somewhere it says, God gave man dominion over the world or the earth. And I could never understand why dominion meant use it up, don't take care of it. So I always thought that was weaponizing a word, how to translate the word dominion. And within that, I think that's the first one where the storybook characters came in. And if you look closely at it, a couple of the characters are very specifically the carpenter from Lewis Carroll's Carpenter and the Walrus, which gets interpreted as sort of a nonsense poem in Alice Through the Looking Glass. And I'm just going to read. I know it's embarrassing when people read poetry, but I'm going to try, especially with a Western Pennsylvania accent. So bear with me. And I think you probably know the poem and some of the lines, but the poem starts, and it's about the walrus and the carpenter walking on the beach, and they see all these little oysters, and they entice them to come take a walk with them. And they say, "Oh, oysters, come and walk with us," the walrus did beseech. "A pleasant walk, a pleasant talk along the briny beach. We cannot do with more than 4 to give a hand to each." And then I'm skipping a good bit here, and this is probably one of the most famous lines from the poem. The time has come," the walrus said, "to talk of many things, of shoes and ships and sealing wax, of cabbages and kings, and why the sea is boiling hot and whether pigs have wings. But wait a bit," the oysters cried, "before we have our chat, for some of us are out of breath and all of us are fat." "No hurry," said the carpenter. They thanked him much for that. "A loaf of bread," the walrus said, "is what we chiefly need. Pepper and vinegar, besides, are very good indeed. Now, if you're ready, oysters dear, we can begin to feed." "But not on us," the oysters cried, turning a little blue. "After such kindness, that would be a dismal thing to do." "The night is fine," the walrus said. "Do you admire the view? It was so kind of you to come, and you are very nice." The carpenter said nothing, but cut us another slice. "I wish you were not quite so deaf. I've had to ask you twice." "It seems a shame," the walrus said, "to play them such a trick, after we've brought them out so far and made them trot so quick." The carpenter said nothing, but the butter spread too thick. "I weep for you," the walrus said. "I deeply sympathize." With sobs and tears he sorted out those of the largest size, holding his pocket handkerchief before his streaming eyes. "Oh, oysters," said the carpenter, "you've had a pleasant run. Shall we be trotting home again?" But the answer came, there was none, and this was scarcely odd because they'd eaten every one. And rereading that, to me, it just, what's going on politically and socially, I think it has so much relevance. When Lewis Carroll was asked about the meaning of that poem, or most of his work, he just said, has no meaning. In fact, I didn't even pick the carpenter and the walrus. I let my illustrator, John Tenniel, pick them. But scholars over the ages have said, well, they think it's a parody, of capital and labor, of consumers and products. So I think it has more meaning. It's than let's just be kind of silly here. So where am I? So another piece, we'll move on to that one a little bit later. So if you look around mostly in this show, the imagery comes from 3 main stories. Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, Pinocchio, and The Wizard of Oz. And I'm so taken by those stories because they were presented as children's stories, or we grew up thinking they were children's stories or fairy tales, but all 3 of them are so loaded with meaning. And they've also held over the decades. You know, they're well over 100 years old. Alice in Wonderland's the newest of the 3, but they've held up over the ages, and most of them can be read as political satires or a moralistic. For Alice in Wonderland and Lewis Carroll's, his take on them is that he said Alice, when he wrote it, it had no meaning. It was just a story to entertain a young girl and her brothers and sisters. It has no meaning. But scholars over the ages have seen it and written about it extensively. One is it's a parody of the politics of Victorian England. And if you look at John Tenniel's drawing of the Red Queen, there's no denying that it's Queen Victoria. Other thoughts were just that he was so tired of just the didactic black and white moralistic preaching of most of the children's literature in the day, which was like you know, little Dickie stole a loaf of bread and then he died kind of thing. And so he thought children were smarter than that and deserved to know that the world and life was more complex. And I have to say that the original John Tenniel illustrations are incredible drawings. If you really look into them, they're just beautiful. For me, the whole story became more about chasing wonder and preserving wonder. So for all those reasons, I steal John Tenniel's imagery. The second book that I steal from the illustrations and the thoughts is Pinocchio. And most of us know Pinocchio from Disney. And a group of writers about 10 years ago set out to recapture it, to un-Disneyfy, and go back to Collodi's original writing, which was political and social very strongly. It was written, it came out as a serial story in Italian newspapers in probably like around 1880. And it was, and his original illustrator also was a social activist, and they were fighting for universal schooling for all children in Italy. And up until then, only the wealthy could afford to have their kids educated. The original story is much, much darker than the cute little, you know, like Jiminy Cricket dies in the original Pinocchio. He's not that cute little green thing that we see in the Disney version. And the nose only grows like 2 or 3 times during the whole thing. One of the most outstanding images is when Pinocchio gets donkey ears, and that's because the wealthy called the poor who worked for them donkeys. And they're trying to convince Pinocchio to go to school, and he throws away or sells his book, and he starts to turn into a donkey. The Wizard of Oz also has a lot of translations, and scholars have studied it a good bit. In this group of images, I have the pumpkin head that you see there is from the second book of The Wizard of Oz. It's Jack Pumpkinhead. And Jack Pumpkinhead, for me, there's no better drawing of a pumpkin than the original illustration for Jack Pumpkinhead. And I think we're split generations here, but the generation that grew up with Tim Burton definitely, like, what's his name, Jack Skellington, that's Jack Pumpkinhead. It's almost directly. So I think a lot of animators and movie makers who grew up reading, still at the tail end of reading The Wizard of Oz, were aware of the illustrations for that. But I've got some trivia about The Wizard of Oz, which I think also makes it interesting. The original book is very different from the movie. It's, you know, a little bit darker, but Hank Baum was a social activist too, and he was very politically active. And he helped William Jennings Bryan run his first campaign. And if you know the story, you know, if you've seen the movie Inherit the Wind about the Scopes trial, we see William Jennings Bryan as a real blustery, strong man. But when he was running, he ran for president 3 times, and when he was running, he was very gentle. He was a populist. He believed in the rights of regular people, not just the glitter, the age of glitter and glamour, the age of the Carnegies and whatever. And also the original illustrator was W.W. Denslow, and he was a social activist. So in The Wizard of Oz, it's often, scholars believe that the Cowardly Lion was William Jennings Bryan, and which goes against this whole blustery Scopes trial, but I said he started out very gently. And the Tin Man are the industrial workers of the world. And in the original book, he says that the Cowardly Lion takes a swipe at the Tin Man and says, look, I can't even make a dent. And that's, according to some scholars, that's making the reference that he couldn't, even though they were thinking the same way, he couldn't get into the industrial workers of the world. They just didn't respond to him. Just to add in there, the scarecrow represented the farmers that were going through drought. The yellow Oz was William McKinley, who fought for the gold standard, and that's what the yellow brick road was, the gold standard. But he saw him as a charlatan that was going to make all these promises, and he bankrupted the country. We went into a depression, a near depression under him. And I thought this one, the Wicked Witch, was the drought that was affecting the West at the time, and she gets killed with a bucket of water, which represents the rain. So when it comes up on Jeopardy, you are set. So anyhow, I thought it just kind of, are you going to tell me when I'm at time or if we're going on here or anything? We could talk about a couple of the pieces specifically, and around the corner here, when you get a chance to walk around, there's one of the big piece there with Howdy Doody up on top, and that piece is called Weaponed Memories, Sunny Days and False Nostalgia. And I told you, so, words and thoughts and eavesdropping on conversations have such an effect on me. And I have so many friends that I grew up with that would say, oh, everything was so much better when I was a kid. Everything was wonderful. And I think baby boomers tend to forget that it wasn't. And because I was thinking, that was, your little pocket might have been nice, but I know where I lived, there were strikes, and my mother worked for a 5 and 10, worked for G.C. Murphy's, and women weren't allowed to be managers till 1979. All people in the country couldn't vote. So how is this better? So everything in there is kind of these symbols of nostalgia and how nostalgia could hurt you. And kind of could go really specific talking about it. Howdy Doody holds the main place in there. And I think even you young guys, you know Howdy Doody? Thank you for saying that. She said yes. Howdy Doody was kind of an icon. It was one of the first children's programs, one of the first very specifically for black and white TV. Remember, the screen was like this big at the time. But he kind of played on the whole cowboy myth that the country was being taken with by then. And I also kind of use him because I never watched Howdy Doody. I was sort of at the tail end of it, but I think I watched him. I could tell you things about Howdy Doody, but I don't think I ever really watched him because our little TV didn't get that station at the time, or I was at the tail end of his popularity. But there were tons of books and paraphernalia. He has this dream that he could, if he had this special white hat, he could do all this magic in the world. So it played into a whole lot of American myths, and I think they still carry to this day. And it was part of this, I think at that time, like the early 60s to the late 60s, there were something like 40 cowboy programs on television. So the whole cowboy myth just keeps clinging to us. And I think like Ronald Reagan came in and he really seized on the cowboy myth. George Bush tried a little bit. So it's been an important icon. I'm trying to remember, on the side of sitting next to Howdy Doody On both sides of him are images, again, from Alice in Wonderland, from the Tea Party, the Mad Hatter. And the Mad Hatter represented the hat workers in England. And I think even the sign on its head is how much the hats cost or what number that specific hat is on the production line. And the hatters were going mad. They actually went, because they would put, like, they worked with really toxic chemicals to dye, to tan, like the beaver fur and whatever. And so the idea of the Mad Hatter is this, these workers have been damaged. So, that's part of my memories there. The other critters that are in there, and one of them, one of my favorite critters besides rabbit, is the jackalope. And I use the jackalope because there was a time people really, really believed they existed. Taxidermy was just discovered, and it was like, oh my God, everybody had to have taxidermy stuff in their parlor. And one of the favorite ones was the jackalope. So I love this idea of something, that gets perpetrated that never existed, but we believe existed. And the zebra, I think the zebra, that might be the only work here that has the zebra. And they're holding televisions and books. But the zebra, I think the zebra is holding a television. But I love the idea of the zebra. Like, in short, every zebra has different stripes. It's like your fingerprint. So it's a form of identity. But when they're all in a group together, they're like a dazzle pattern where you can't pick out one from another. And I always felt that described people that just clung together as a belief, like I believe the Christian right does, that here's this, we're individuals, but we kind of mush into this one identity kind of thing. I can't think of anything else. Vince, is there anything else in there that's, you're good, so. Okay, so that's that piece, just to talk about that a little bit. And I thought an important thing is to remember that nostalgia is, and this love and this, it was wonderful back then, is one of the steps towards fascism, that something was somehow better behind. And if you read Umberto Eco, who wrote The Name of the Rose, he wrote a lot of essays about the power and the destruction of nostalgia. So those are all things that kind of move me to do the work. If you move down the line a little bit, there's a piece called Willful Wandering, Alice's Lot's Wife. And I was always taken by, I said I was raised Catholic, so we don't know the Bible, but I knew the story of Lot's wife. And I think probably everyone across religion knows the story that when Sodom and Gomorrah were being destroyed, she disobeyed God's rule and turned around and looked at the city, and she turned to a pillar of salt. And I always had this question like, why salt? And why do we interpret that as bad? If we need salt to live, maybe that was a reward for her. And I thought it was really interesting. We never really see her name in the Bible. And I looked it up. Her real name is Ado, A-D-O, or Idot, I-D-O-T. So I always think she deserves a name. And so I'm going to, just always confused me. And I couple her, it's like a retelling with Alice. I put Alice in her place. So I love that shape of Alice when she drinks I don't know whether it's the eat me or drink me, where she grows to 15 feet tall and she's very strong. So I wanted to give her, Alice, Otto, a new identity. And she stands on a stag, which could be interpreted as standing on something that's very masculine, or in some Christian symbolism, the stag is a symbol for Christ. So it works together. And I'm going to read a whole poem to you this time. And this is, for me, this poem sums it up, my feelings about Alice. While Lot, the conscience of a nation, struggles with the Lord, she struggles with the housework. The city of sin is where she raises the children. Baal or Adonai, whoever is God, the bread must still be made and the door sill swept. The Lord may kill the children tomorrow, but today they must be bathed and fed. Well and good to condemn your neighbor's religion, but weren't they there when the baby was born and when the well collapsed? While her husband communes with God, she tucks the children into bed. In the morning, when he tells her of the judgment, that is, God's decision to destroy the city, she puts down the lamp she is cleaning and calmly begins to pack. In between bundling up the children and deciding what will go, she runs for a moment to say goodbye to the herd, gently patting each soft head with tears in her eyes for the animals that will not understand. She smiles blindly to the woman who held her hand at childbed. It is easy for eyes that have always turned to heaven not to look back. Those who have been by necessity drawn to earth cannot forget that life is lived from day to day. Good to a God and good in human terms are two different things. On the breast of the hill, she chooses to be human and turns in farewell and never regrets the sacrifice. I just think that is such a beautiful poem. So somewhere, and probably right around when I did that piece, the whole framework began to disappear. I got rid of, the center and moved me up. Three of the newest pieces are right here around me. And I began to do these about a year ago, possibly a little bit more. And I realized, throughout my life, I've always tried to deny just, how personal things are, because it's not cool to be super personal in art, but I'm not cool so at all. I never was. So I think they're so personal, and as I step back from them, I realize how they're really a reflection of how I've been feeling about what is happening in the country. The first one of this series of 4 is on the back wall. It's the very fluorescent orange one, and it's called, I'm not sure, but the main word is grasp. And you see the rabbit from Alice in Wonderland, where he begins to tumble, and he's repeated over and over again, almost like a cinematic sequence. And Alice is big at that point, and there's this beautiful illustration of her giant hand coming down and saving the rabbit. And I use, instead of putting my loose drawings, the little scribbles in the middle, they're growing, and there's a kind of the goofy hand grasping at trying to save the wonder. And just, point in my aesthetics, I like a combination of different styles within one drawing, because I kind of have all those different things rolling in my head, something very childlike or comic or crude next to something very traditionally rendered. So the piece here that I kind of spoke about, the vase surrounding all of the pumpkin heads, I think, if I remember right, is called Entangled Faith. Till human voices wake us and we drown. And again, I'm using the Jack Pumpkinhead, beautiful head, and it's sort of attributed to how we need to make this God in our image. And the Jack Pumpkinhead in The Wizard of Oz, it's the second book, can be really read as a creation story. So it's that, and I think on the sides you can see Pinocchio is in a straw boat with the Christian lamb. And, I just, that phrase from T.S. Eliot, until human voices wake us and we drown, is sometimes how I feel. Again, the piece here is called Entangled Grace, One Eye Blind. And it's, again, about how religion being entangled up in either beautiful words, but kind of holding a blind eye to what it sees. And I think one of the first ones in the series is where it completely turned around is the little one on the back, the front wall here. And that one is also, I think that's Entangled Justice, One Eye Blind. And I think that one, and I didn't realize that I did it when the whole issues began with the Supreme Court about some of Clarence Thomas's misdoings and deeds and the whole, just some of the bills that the new court put through. So, and one of my favorite characters in that is the March Hare from Alice in Wonderland, and it's actually from the second, Through the Looking Glass, and he changes his name. He's their Hare in the second book. It's spelled different. He's dressed differently. And the funny thing is he becomes a lawyer. He's the lawyer for the Knave of Hearts that stole the tarts. And so he begins, at one point, he's trying to bribe the king with that thing that he's holding in that drawing looks like pizza, but it's actually described as a ham sandwich. And I just thought, that's so great. Whether you get that or not, I think that's just this lawyer bribing with a ham sandwich. So I think that one is called One Eye Blind and a Ham Sandwich. So that one, and the newest one in the lot is the one behind me, Broken Cloud, A Broken Sky with Monsters. And for me, the sky sort of a personal feeling for an issue about hope and faith towards something's going to get better. If you look in my phone, the most photos will be cat photos, and second to that will be images of the sky. Like I probably take 5 or 6 of the sky every day, this need to look at it. And so it's sort of about my broken hope, pieces missing from hope. Again, this is the March Hare, and he's next to a leopard, and I just love the image of the leopard looked so good with him. A tiger would have been too close to the life of Pi, but I always love the phrase about a leopard can't change his spots. And you just want, well, is that good? Which has always been said as a bad thing, but isn't it a good thing too? So that's where this is where I am now in my work, coming back in and cutting into the shapes and stuff, so to form different things. I can we can open it up to questions, but before I do that, really quickly, I'll tell you how they're done. Are we in good time?
We're good, yeah.
We're good, okay. They're done, I begin by sketching different characters, stealing them off the internet from all these people, and then I'm on Photoshop, and I sort of cobble together a background, and then I begin feeding the images into it. And I like to kid myself that I know what it's going to look like when I'm done, but I really don't. That just makes me trust myself, but they never look exactly like what I think they're going to look like. I've never learned that over 70 years of drawing. So I work it all out on Photoshop, and then when I run it, I know 5 steps on Photoshop, and I always say, I'm going to do them. So these go through that, and then I enlarge the pieces. I go to Kinko's, I know all my friends out at Kinko's, and I enlarge them to the size that I want them to be, because I know I want them shaped. So I either work the shape out on Photoshop, or once I enlarge them, I'm cutting and chopping into them. I also add more things, more drawing, more layers on the photo, the big blow-ups from Kinko's, which are amazing now. And then I broke somebody's heart once when I told them this. I trace that image onto the boards, and very carefully, and because if you look at a lot of them, I just love that image, that line that you get when you're tracing something on there like a carbon. And if you know the outsider artist Henry Darger, his traced lines are so exquisite. So the one behind you has a lot of the traced lines left, so I really wanted to begin to reveal them. And just as kind of, they are, I brought our secret weapon to show you. My husband builds all the forms for me, and they're birch plywood. They're just calendared just like a canvas with a frame in the back. And where they're shaped, he worked for the movies and learned about this great stuff called wiggle and waggle board. So that's how like some of the inner framing is done with the waggle board. And just there, I begin with house paints. I don't like to draw on, to put a ground. I don't like gesso, so I use premium Lowe's house paints to put my first ground down. Thin down washes of acrylic paints or house paints go over them. So that's pretty much how they're done. So, nah.
Well, thank you so much, and we appreciate all of that insight into your process and your inspiration. We do have just a couple minutes for questions, and because we are recording this for our YouTube feed, I will do my best talk show host impersonation and bring you a microphone. And because we are actually sharing our mics with our theater department right now, I will also then have to bring a microphone back to Pat so that she can answer. So if you could be patient with the awkwardness of that so that we can try and keep everything on the digital realm for those who weren't able to join us today. Does anyone have any questions? Yes, Lacey.
Why did you choose to include Godzilla in this painting or colored pencil?
Because he's a monster that we created, but it's also a monster that has some questions to it. Like, I haven't watched all the Godzilla movies, but I love the really old Japanese images of it. And this is actually from like the old, very old Japanese one. And I thought I read somewhere that Godzilla, which makes sense, was a woman. Was a female monster and was just trying to was tearing down Tokyo to protect her young. So, like everything, I love the imagery, I love how it looks, so that's important, but I love that backstory behind it.
And I'll just tell a quick story to go along with this because it's very funny. We had a elementary school group touring the museum last week. And when we start, I ask if any have been to museums before and what they've seen at museums. And then I ask, what do you think you're going to see at an art museum? And they usually say, paintings, sculptures, things. And a little boy raised his hand, totally unprompted, had no idea about your work. And he goes, Godzilla. And I said, I can actually show you Godzilla in the gallery today. That was very prescient. So that's a fun connection to how we've been doing outreach around this exhibition.
Someone asked me once, how do I know when my work is good? And I'm like, I really don't, but when kids like it, I think I've really accomplished something.
Excellent. We have time for maybe one or two more questions. Anybody have any more questions? Yes.
So when you first started talking about political questions and things that you're considering, I immediately started rereading the shapes of these images as kind of like state boundaries almost. Like I'm almost seeing like a truncated Ohio River at the bottom of there. And then I started seeing the bottom corner of this one that you're in front of almost as like a faded map, and maybe there's a river kind of going through this piece. And I was wondering if you had any thoughts about kind of like the dual functions of state borders. How are borders weaponized in the ways that you're talking about language being weaponized and things like that? Yeah.
Take your time to think about it. Not really, but I'm interested in, there was a show on television once that was kind of obscure, and you had to get up early Saturday morning about how states got their borders. And those are pretty interesting. And for what it's worth, I live right on the border of west of Pennsylvania and the upper panhandle of WVU. And I am totally fascinated with maps, so that happens too. For me, the importance of the shapes are, I want them to read a little bit more like objects, and some of them prior to this have been more eccentric than this. This is, I wanted the Humpty Dumpty one is probably the most eccentric, but there's a great deal of distortion that I put into the drawing, and I wanted to emphasize that with the shape that's around it. Plus, my husband doesn't want to build rectangles. So I think she's going to end it, but I just want to say, I know one of the things that's really important to say is I agree with Percival Everett, and I've always said I put a great deal of trust in the viewer, and I think it was on my statement in bold letters, that a work isn't really complete until somebody's looked at it. And I do them for me, and I can't stop doing them, but nothing thrills me more is when somebody comes up and says to me, hey, I got a story about Godzilla, or I have a story, do you know this about a rabbit, or wow, this, so I put great trust in the viewer, and I always, the old teacher in me comes back to say, never want, if you see artwork that you don't really like or understand, try to find out what's behind it. Like you would never look at a chemistry equation on a whiteboard and say, boy, that's stupid, when you would think, wow, somebody's really smart. It's no guarantee that artwork's smart, but give things time and let things unfold within you.
So I do think that's actually a beautiful place to end. So thank you again for joining us. And as I said, this is our last Lunchtime Looks program of the year. We do have a celebration of the inspiration from Alice in Wonderland going on here tomorrow. We have Wonderland at the Art Museum. So from 12:30 to 2:30, we'll have an event that is geared toward children and young people, based on decorating your own teacups. If the weather cooperates, we'll have eggs out in our sculpture garden and all sorts of fun things like that. And then from 3 to 5 for our student audience and for our adult audience, we're going to have some Mad Hatter mayhem and some similar activities and opportunity to engage with that inspiration. And that's one of our last public programs of the year. But I will say, if one of your goals is to have children appreciate it, from my role, I can tell you that that is very much happening in this space, and that people of all ages are engaging on very different levels to understand and really appreciate as the viewers of this work. So thank you very much for bringing it to us. And we are open to the public right now, so I do know one of the challenges of this format is that we stand stationary in one place so that the camera can follow us, but Pat really wanted us to see a lot of those details, so please do spend some time exploring the gallery, look and find all those little creatures and characters that she was talking about in the space. Thank you very much.